Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Harin Ram Seri from Kirodimal College, University of Delhi. Today we are going to discuss about a module, community characteristic, type of biodiversity, diversity index, abundance, species richness, vertical and horizontal stratification, part 3rd, where I am specially discuss about the characteristic of community. From paper A Principle of Ecology. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the structure of community, briefly study the physical and biological structure of community, study the vertical and horizontal zonation, stratification of community, and the diversity indices. Understand the role of species richness, dominance, and diversity in characterizing a community. Learn about the characteristic of community such as ecotone and edge effect, etc. Community is an organized ecological unit in which organisms interact through various associations such as predation, competition, mutualism, and parasitism, likely to each other via feeding relationship and other adapted to prevailing physical environmental surroundings. These interaction, associations, and adaptations by the organism provided community is its distinct structure and influence other characteristics such as growth, developments of the community, dominance, and species diversity. Structure of community. The basic structure of community is divided into physical and biological structure. The physical structure of community is defined by the growth forms and life forms. Physical structure, growth form and life form. The structure and form of vegetation define the differences between different terrestrial communities. On the basis of growth forms, the vegetation of community can be classified. Plant community can be exhibited different growth forms such as short or tall plants, woody or herbaceous plants, or deciduous or evergreen plants. The herb, shrubs, and trees are further subdivided. These categorizes into evergreen sclerophyles, needle-leaved evergreen thorn trees, broad-leaved evergreen or broad-leaved deciduous trees, dwarf shrubs, grasses, ferns, mosses, lichens, and forbs. The plants are also classified on the basis of life forms by Christian Raunecker 1903. He is a Danish botanist who defined the life form on the basis of pertaining tissue above ground or simply height of the plant. He suggested that in a given area, all the species are grouped into 6 principal classes of life forms, namely epiphytes, pharenophytes, chemiophytes, hemicryptophytes, cryptophytes, and therophytes. A community consisting mostly of pharenophytes are categorized by warm climate where when mostly comprised of hemicryptophytes and chemiophytes are categorized by cold climate. Stratification. The ecological communities are arranged in different layer or strata forms a phenomenon called stratification. For example, in a natural forest community, as per the height of the plant, the community is arranged into number of strata or layers such as herbaceous layer consisting of herbaceous plant followed by shrub, smaller trees and tall trees. These fractions in the community is caused by the gradations in the external environmental factors like water levels, temperature and light. Different strata or layer of forest community receive different degree of light intensity, providing vertical stratification to the community structure. In a forest community, generally three or more vertically layers or strata of plants are found, including a herb layer, shrub, small tree layer followed by canopy tree layer. The canopy tree or other taller trees produces more foliage and entrap the light to each smaller plants on the ground. The gradients in the physical environment of the community cause horizontal layering or patterns among species. Differences in the amount of factors such as nutrients and waters and significantly alter the distribution of plant and animal species over a region. A community consists of different growth forms determining the community structure such as herbs, shrubs, trees. A growth form also have variations such as a tree can be long-lived or broad-lived, etc. Various growth forms have different mode of arrangement, classifying community into vertical stratification and horizontal zonation. That is, populations assemble to form communities and these populations are dispersed into definite vertical or horizontal strata. Zonation: the septal arrangement of community species exhibit patterns and based on these patterns the community is divided into subcommunities which are ecologically related. If the distribution pattern is horizontal, it is called zonation layering in community. For example, in lakes or deep ponds, majorly three zones are recognized, that is, littoral, limnatic, photic or open water, and profundal zone, aphotic and deep water. The organism varies in each zone of zonation pattern. Another example include mountain-associated vegetation. Altitudinal and latitudinal variations of vegetation is relation to climate of the existing region. This figure represents a deep lake depicting a horizontal zonation. This figure represents a mountain depicting a horizontal zonation. Vertical stratification. Vertical changes in pattern of community structure is called as stratification. Vertical stratification is as simple as the horizontal zonation community of pond, where each zone has different vertical story or complex stratification. For example, in grassland communities, distinct floor with a different yet characteristics growth form are exhibited. The lowest vertical subdivision is called subterranean beneath the soil. Subterranean, which include roots of the plant, debris and living organisms like soil, bacterium, protozoa or fungi, etc. Herbaceous subterranean, above the soil with roots of growth forms. The herbaceous substratum includes upper parts of growth forms. The forest community stratification is much more complex with 5 vertical layering include the vertical stratification in the forest community mostly comprised of following strata: subterranean forest floor with the upper part of the growth form along with the laters, fungi, bacteria, etc. Herbaceous vegetation, shrubs and forest strata canopy. An additional stratum called emergent trees which are present in the tropical rainforest and these plants rises above the canopy of the forest. This figure represents vertical stratification in a forest community. Forest animals live in different substrata and many of them may shift between substratums. The properties, requirement, adjustment of one stratum can be similar to the same stratum of different community somewhere else in the world. For example, forest floor of one community in country one share common requirements and adjustment to the community in country 2, although these countries are geographically separated. The animals living such geographically separated but similar substratum are called ecological equivalent. Biological structure and characteristic of community. A community has the following characteristic. Number first, structure. By virtue of understanding the structure of community, the frequency, density, and abundance of different type of species are measured. Number second, dominance. The community type is determined by the dominant species. These species of one or more type either occupy large space or occur in large number and called as dominant species. Number third, diversity. The community show diversity which is composed of different species of plants and animals in the different groups that may be belong to different growth forms or life forms and are essentially prevailing in uniform environmental surroundings. Diverse communities are healthy and stable communities. Number 4, periodicity. The dominant species of community are studied in various seasons of the year to determine the various life process such as reproduction, growth, and respiration. Periodicity is defined as the expression and reoccurrence of various life process annually at regular intervals in nature. Stratification. Within ecological communities, the habitat arrangement in form of layering, either vertical or horizontal, is called stratification. The stratification of two different types of communities may be differ, such as the lake community represent horizontal stratification, whereas mountain plant communities obey vertical stratification. F. Ecotone and edge effect. Ecotones are easily recognizable marginal zones of vegetations separating two distinct types of communities. The species diversity is greater in the ecotone in the comparison to the adjacent communities. This phenomenon of greater intensity and diversity at the common junction is defined as edge effect. G. Ecological niche. Ecological niche is defined as the role or function of species in place in its ecosystem. In the ecological complex, different plants and animals of different species differ in their function and their combined interactions with other species in its environment are called its ecological niche. In other words, it can also be defined as the smaller habitat of single species within a large habitat in which it survives. E.P. Odom defines and differentiates ecological niche and habitat by saying that ecological niche is the profession of the species within the ecosystem where the habitat is its address. H. Community productivity. Community productivity is defined as the net storage of energy and production of biomass per unit time by the community. I. Biotic stability. Biotic stability is the ability of community to regain its equilibrium followed by disturbances causing population fluctuations. The stability of community is directly dependent on the diversity of the community. In 1994, Krabs categorized communities into five characteristics that can be studied, namely growth forms and life forms, described earlier in section: species richness, dominance, relative abundance, and trophic structure. Other major type of factors that constitute the structure of the community are as follows: species richness. Species richness is given as a number of species in a community. In an ecological habitat, landscape, or community, the count of different species represents the species richness. It does not indicate about the species abundance or relative abundance of species. For example, beetles counted from a pitfall trap, etc., sample heterogeneity and the number of species influence the species richness. If the samples are collected from different environment and habitats, then the collected data is higher for species richness. Thus, sampling should be performed on the large areas as the more heterogeneous environment prevails and large size of population. Species richness helps in assigning the conservation values of landscape or habitat by relative comparisons. Although it does not consider the type of species, but areas with the rare species have higher conservation values than same number of species which are commonly found. Species diversity. The major biodiversity measurements are species richness, Senner-Wenner index, and Simpson index. Species diversity comprised of two factors: species evenness and species richness, number of species. Species evenness indicates the relative abundance of each species. In this figure represent community first and community second. Both communities have three different types of plant species depicting same species richness but relative abundance vary. In community first, species A, B and C are equal in proportion 3 each, indicating higher species evenness, thus revealed higher species diversity. In community second, species C is more in proportion, indicating low species evenness and species diversity. Diversity indices. In a given community, the species of diversity can be measured mathematically by the diversity index. The measurement of diversity index is dependent on the species abundance and species richness. The species abundance is given as the number of organisms per species and the species richness in a given as the number of species in the community. Information statics indices and dominances indices are the two ways of diversity indices given as a Shannon index and Simpson index respectively. The equation for the two indices are given as Shannon-Wenner index. It's a common index of species diversity represented as H naught equal to minus summation S start from I is equal to 1 pi log E pi, where large or capital N total number of individuals found, where small n is individuals of one particular species found. Small p is equal to small n divided by capital N, which means individuals of one particular species found divided by total number of individuals found. Summation is sum of the calculation. H naught means diversity index. The proportion of ith species is represented as pi, while small s is species richness, that is number of species in community. Simpson index. This equation is represented as follows, where capital N is total number of individual in ith species, small n is individuals of one particular ith species. Small p is equal to small n divided by capital N. The Shannon index is based on the assumptions the samples are randomly collected and all species are represented in that randomly collected sample. It's an information static index. The Simpson index is majorly dependent on the dominant or common species and thus it's a dominance index. In this type of index, rare species in less number with only few representatives do not produce any significant differences in the measurement of diversity. In 1949, Edward H. Simpson introduced Simpson Index, which measures the extent of concentration when organisms are classified. In 1950, Oris C. Herfrandel rediscovered the same index. In 1945, Albert O. Hirschman already introduced the square root of the index. Therefore, the Simpson index in ecology is also called as Herfrandel-Hirschman index or Herfrandel index in economics. Gini-Simpson Index. In contrast to the probabilities of some same type of entities taken at the random in the original Simpson index lambda, the Gini-Simpson index 1 minus lambda represent its transformation that equals that probability of two entities corresponding to different type. In ecology, it is also called as PIE or probability of interspecific encounter. The equation is expressed as follows. Dominance. In a community, different species interacts among themselves, and in some communities the interaction results into dominance by the one species or by the prominent species in a group. The organism dominating other are referred as dominants. In ecology, the proportion of biomass or abundance of one species or taxon than other interacting species or taxon is in a community. It's the dominant species that define the ecological community. For example, Alnus glutinosa, elder, is the tree dominating in the Western Europe woodland areas. They are used to classify or identify the type of ecology. In a community, we can consider a community as dominant on the basis of following. Either they are occupying maximum space or community habitat or have highest biomass or play critical role in nutrient cycling, contribute maximum to energy flow or regulate other community organisms. Sometimes numerically abundant means more in number, makes organisms superior and dominant but not necessarily always. Microclimate within the community also affect and complicate this system by contributing more dominant species per microclimate. Microclimates have local environment differences like nutrient levels, moisture, topographic location, etc. It's only how impactful and important functions a species play in shaping the structure and function of community which decided its dominance. Sometimes even low density group of species, also single species, can be dominant. Keystone species. Dominant species, plant or animals, playing crucial and unique role and high effective community structure and function in relative to its abundance are called keystone species. These keystone species have very intense interspecies association, thus control the number and type of other species in community. Therefore, if we remove keystone species, the community will shift to new form dramatically and vary from its original structure and function. A classical example of keystone species is Pastor oraceus, a starfish. This starfish is a keystone predator and the natural predator of mussels, sea urchins, and many other shellfishes. So, if we remove starfish, the mussels or sea urchin population will proliferate in an uncontrolled manner, shifting the community. Another example includes a prey-predator system where small predators like weevil, E. lecotini, which forages on herbaceous species called E. watermefoil. E. watermefoil can eliminate dominant plant species of the inhabited community, but it's the predator E. lecotini which control E. watermefoil from doing so by feeding on it. E. watermefoil prey number is less, thus required low density of predator E. watermefoil. But if predator is eliminated out the community, the prey will be outgrow in number dramatically, thereby vanishing the dominant species of community, and thus by eliminating the small number of predator, the community character will now be altered without its actual dominant species. This example indicates the that dominant species directly control the community character, but keystone species indirectly alter the community character. Several approaches are used to determine the ecological dominance. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individuals of a species found in large number represent the abundance of species, and its distribution with ecosystem is called as relative species abundances. Relative abundance: when the total abundance of all organisms is compared to numerically abundant one species, it is called as species relative abundance. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individuals of a species found in a large number represents the abundance of species, and its distribution within ecosystem is called as relative species abundances. Relative dominance: dominance among same-sized species can be measured by occupying a species to an entire area of community. Relative frequency: among different sized species, the dominance is measured by relative frequency. All these three measurements summed up to provide an important value to each species. These values of species rank them in a list, and index species are the species with high level of important value. Sporadically, locally abundant: the frequency of species occurrence in all samples is termed as incidence, which related to abundance. If the incidence or frequency is low but the abundance of species in sample is high, it is called sporadically abundant. How to measure and calculate relative species abundance? There are several kinds of sampling methods such as track count, spot light count, monitoring point pressure, rod kill count, and plant cover for plant species, etc. And the relative abundance of the community is calculated as relative abundance of species is equal to number of species from one sampling divided by total number of species of all sampling. Ecotone: the two integrating community meets at a transitional area called ecotone or transitional zone. The transition area between ecosystems like grassland and forest form ecologic regional ecotone, and between forest and field form a local ecotone which can be wide or narrow. This ecotone may appear as clear boundaries with homogeneous surfaces or in gradual blending forms between two communities. Formation of ecotone: when physical environment changes, example from forest to clean land, a clear and sharp interface is created between two communities. Moreover, gradual blended interface form between unique local species and species common to both interacting community found together. For example, in mountain ranges, most wetlands are ecotones. Example, woodlands of Western Europe. Type of ecotone: halocline gradient salinity, thermocline gradient in temperature, picocline water density gradient, chemiocline chemical gradient. This figure represents different form of ecotones. features. A sharp vegetation transition, for example changes in grass color, indicates an ecotone. Physiogamy, a key indicator of ecotone, where the plant species differ in physical appearance. Change in species in indicators of ecotone, where we observed some specific organism at one side of the ecotone boundary while some other specific organism on the other side. Septal mass effect, new plant establishment or migration, obscures an ecotone as they cannot form self-sustaining population in different ecotone. But if survives between two communities, then species richness is exhibited by the ecotone. An ecotone can reveal the space sharing efficiency of two communities and the types of biomes by observing the exotic species abundance in ecotone. Best model to study diverse ecosystem, shift in dominance represented by ecotone. Ecotone act as an ecological niche for the species colonizing at the junction called edge effect. Ecoclines, a physical transition zone between biological systems termed as ecoline. Related to ecotone, it depicts the physiochemical environmental changes microclimatically or chemically signaling an ecotone via signals such as gradient of hydrothermal salinity or pH respectively. Edge effects. In ecology, ecotone exhibit changes in population constituting community structure allowing for greater biodiversity at the boundaries of the merged habitats, and this is called as edge effects. When two habitats are separated by Weiss edge effect called ecotone, then they develop their own type of vegetation and environmental conditions. Types of edge effects. Narrow edge effects, abrupt ending of one habitat from where another habitat began, is a narrow edge effect. Wide range effect. Significant distance between two habitats is exhibited as wide edge effect or ecotone. Induced edge effect. The structural changes are induced over time either by the human interference or natural disturbances, example fire, and leads to induced edge effect. Inherent edge effect. The border between two habitats are separated and stabilized by natural features are called as inherent edge effect. Perforate edge effect. The distance between two habitats has gaps in them which help in assisting other habitats. Convoluted edge effect. A non-linear division of two habitats leads to convoluted edge effect. Edge effect on succession. When vegetation spreads, the succession is affected by edge effects. Different species colonizes to central portion or to the edge leading to different species distribution. With the changes in orientation, the edge also changes, thus participating in different vegetation patterns. Other structural factors may include seasonal and diurnal fluctuations. With space and time, the population fluctuates in the communities. Pattern diversity. Community is organized on the basis of pattern diversity. The patterns can be horizontal segregation or vertical stratification, etc. So student, let us summarize what we learned in this module. The interaction, associations and adaptation by the organism provide community its distinct structure and influence other characteristics such as growth and development of the community, dominance and species diversity. The basic structure of community is divided into physical and biological structure. The physical structure of community is defined by the growth form and life forms. On the basis of growth forms, the vegetation of community can be classified. Plant community may exhibit different growth forms such as short or tall plants, woody or herbaceous plants, or deciduous or evergreen plants. The plants are also classified on the basis of life forms, classified on the basis of pertaining tissue above ground or simply height of the plant. All the species are grouped into 6 principal classes of life forms, namely epiphytes, pharenophytes, chemiophytes, hemicryptophytes, cryptophytes, and therophytes. The ecological communities are arranged in different layer or strata form a phenomenon called stratification. This fractionation in the community is caused by the gradation in the external environmental factors like water level, temperature, and light. Different strata or layer of forest community receive different degree of light intensity, providing vertical stratification to the community structure. The gradients in the physical environment of the community causes horizontal layering or patterns among species. Differences in the amount of factors such as nutrients and water can significantly alter the distribution of plant and animal species over a region. Various growth forms have different mode of arrangement, classifying community into vertical stratification and horizontal zonation, that is, population assembled to form communities, and these populations are dispersed into definite vertical or horizontal strata. If the distribution pattern is horizontal, it's called zonation, layering in community. For example, in lakes or deep ponds, majorly 3 zones are recognized: littoral, limnatic, photic or open water, and profundal zone, aphotic or deep water. Vertical stratification is as simple as horizontal zonation, where each zone has different vertically story or complex stratification. The forest community stratification is much more complex with 5 vertical layering, including the vertical stratification in the forest community, mostly comprised of falling stratas, subterranean forest floor with the upper part of the growth form along with the laters, fungi, bacteria, etc. Herbaceous vegetation, shrubs, and forest strata canopy. The biological structure of the community is characterized by the factors such as species richness, dominance, relative abundance, ecotone, and edge effects. Species richness is given as a number of species in a community, sample heterogeneity, and the number of species influence the species richness. Species diversity comprised 2 factors: species evenness and species richness. Number of species and species evenness indicates the relative abundance of each species. In a community, different species interact among themselves, and in some communities the interaction results into dominance by the one species or by the prominent species in a group. The organism dominating other are referred as dominants. Dominant species, plant, animals, playing the crucial and unique role and highly affect community structure and function in relative to its abundance are called keystone species. If a sample is collected from a large area, then the individual of a species found in a large number represent the abundance of a species and its distribution within the ecosystem called as relative species abundances. Two integrating community meets at the transitional area called ecotone. This ecotone may appear as a clear boundaries with homogeneous surfaces or in a gradual blending forms between two communities. In ecology, ecotone exhibit changes in population constituting community structure, allowing for the greater biodiversity at the boundaries of the emerged habitats, and this is called as effects.